Imagine a city reduced to rubble. Stalingrad, late 1942. Once a thriving industrial hub on the banks of the Volga River, it now lay in ruins, blanketed by snow and choked with smoke. The devastation was almost unimaginable, with entire neighborhoods flattened and the skyline broken by the twisted remains of factories and homes. Every street became a battlefield, every building transformed into a fortress. The city's shattered walls echoed with the sounds of gunfire, explosions, and desperate shouts. Soldiers fought for every inch, turning basements and stairwells into deadly traps. Two colossal armies, Nazi Germany's Wehrmacht and the Soviet Red Army, clashed for control of this strategic city on the Volga River. The stakes could not have been higher. Whoever controlled Stalingrad would control a vital gateway to the oil-rich Caucasus and the heart of the Soviet Union. The battle was more than a fight for territory. It was a brutal contest of wills between two dictators, Hitler and Stalin. Each saw Stalingrad as a personal test, a place to prove their ideology and power. The outcome would echo across the globe, marking the beginning of the end for Hitler's ambitions and altering the course of World War II. News of the battle's result sent shockwaves through both Axis and Allied nations, changing strategies and morale overnight. The fighting was relentless. Hand-to-hand combat in sewers, factories, and shattered apartments. Day and night, soldiers endured unimaginable hardship, with snipers lurking in every shadow and supplies running dangerously low. For new Soviet soldiers, life expectancy was sometimes less than a day. Many were barely trained, yet they fought with fierce determination, knowing that retreat was not an option. For the Germans, what began as a confident advance soon turned into a frozen, starving nightmare. Surrounded by the harsh Russian winter, cut off from supplies and battered by constant Soviet attacks, their morale and strength crumbled. Stalingrad became a symbol of suffering and resilience, where the German war machine was finally stopped. Civilians and soldiers alike endured hunger, cold, and terror, but their spirit refused to break. Before Stalingrad, Hitler's armies seemed unstoppable, sweeping across Europe with lightning-fast blitzkrieg tactics. City after city fell, and the world watched in fear as Nazi power expanded. But Stalingrad changed everything. After this brutal siege, Germany was forced onto the defensive, pushed back step by a resurgent Red Army. The myth of Nazi invincibility was shattered. This story isn't just about armies and generals, but about Hitler's obsessions and catastrophic decisions. His refusal to allow retreat, his fixation on capturing the city that bore Stalin's name, and his underestimation of Soviet resolve, all played a part in the unfolding disaster. His overconfidence and refusal to face reality turned a strategic objective into a catastrophe. Generals pleaded for flexibility, but Hitler's stubbornness sealed the fate of his troops. We'll explore the epic mistakes that trapped an entire German army, over 250,000 men, and handed the initiative to the Allies. The surrender at Stalingrad was a humiliation that Germany would never recover from. Stalingrad is a dramatic lesson in how pride and poor planning can lead to ruin. It stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of war and how a single battle can change the fate of nations forever. In summer 1942, Germany's main objective was oil, the lifeblood of its war machine. The plan seized the Caucasus oil fields. Stalingrad, an industrial city on the Volga, was initially a secondary target. Its real value was its position, an industrial hub and a vital transport artery for Soviet oil and supplies. Capturing Stalingrad would sever Soviet logistics and secure the German flank, but the city's name gave it outsized importance. For Hitler, Stalin's city was a personal challenge. Taking it would be a propaganda coup and a humiliation for Stalin. This symbolic value clouded Hitler's judgment, turning a strategic goal into an obsession. The reasons for targeting Stalingrad were both strategic and personal. That mix of logic and vendetta drew the German Sixth Army into a battle that would become its grave. As the German Sixth Army advanced, Hitler's fixation on Stalingrad's name overshadowed its strategic value. What should have been a military operation became a personal crusade. Hitler split Army Group South, one part for the oil fields, the other for Stalingrad, violating the principle of concentration of force. This weakened both advances, stretching resources thin. German generals warned against a drawn-out city fight, but Hitler's orders were absolute. He demanded the complete capture of every street, refusing to consider surrounding or bypassing the city. The obsession forced the Germans into a grinding urban battle, negating their advantages. Military logic was abandoned for personal vendetta. The Sixth Army was ordered to take the city itself, not just cut it off. This decision would prove disastrous. Hitler's overconfidence infected the German high command. They underestimated Soviet strength and overextended their supply lines across hostile territory. Every bullet, every meal had to travel hundreds of miles, vulnerable to attack. The army operated at the edge of its logistical limits, ignoring the lessons of the previous winter. Soldiers lacked winter gear, gambling on a quick victory. Splitting Army Group South left the flanks dangerously thin, held by under-equipped Romanian, Hungarian and Italian allies. These troops were no match for a determined Soviet assault. The German command knew the risk, but believed the Soviets too weak to exploit it. It was a fatal miscalculation. While Germans fought in Stalingrad's ruins, the Soviets prepared a secret counteroffensive, Operation Uranus. Their plan struck the weakly held German flanks, not the city itself. Warnings of Soviet buildups were ignored by Hitler, who was fixated on street fighting. He dismissed intelligence and refused to reinforce the vulnerable flanks. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets attacked, smashing through Romanian lines north and south of Stalingrad. Within days, the pincers met, trapping the German Sixth Army and its allies, over 300,000 men. Hitler's blindness to the threat sealed their fate. The Germans were now surrounded, cut off from supplies and escape. The Soviets had sprung the trap, the Sixth Army was encircled, and the tide of the battle turned. Hitler's refusal to adapt had catastrophic consequences. As the Soviet encirclement tightened around Stalingrad, the Sixth Army found itself completely cut off from the outside world. General Friedrich Paulus, recognizing the dire situation, urgently requested permission from Berlin to attempt a breakout and save his men from certain destruction. Military logic and the advice of his generals demanded a retreat, but Hitler, stubborn and unyielding, refused to consider withdrawal. Instead, he issued a direct order for the Sixth Army to stand fast, assuring his commanders that relief would soon arrive. Declaring Stalingrad a fortress, Hitler insisted it be held at all costs, transforming the city into a symbol of Nazi resolve, but also of hubris and disaster. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, boldly promised that his air force could supply the encircled army by air, claiming that daily flights would deliver all the food, ammunition and fuel the soldiers needed, a claim that was tragically unrealistic. The airlift operation quickly proved to be a disaster. The Luftwaffe managed to deliver only a fraction of the required supplies, and the harsh Russian winter made flying even more perilous. Soldiers began to starve and freeze as rations dwindled. Ammunition ran dangerously low, and with little food or medicine, disease spread rapidly through the ranks, further weakening the trapped army. Hitler's pride and refusal to accept reality turned the city into a death trap for his own men, sealing their fate. The Sixth Army was left to endure the full fury of the Russian winter, with hope fading as each day passed and the situation grew more desperate. The promise of relief was nothing more than an empty illusion. No rescue force could break through the Soviet lines. The airlift, hampered by weather and enemy fire, could not sustain the army. Supplies often fell into Soviet hands or were lost in the snow. Starvation, frostbite, and relentless Soviet attacks took a deadly toll, decimating the ranks of the once proud Sixth Army. Hitler's refusal to allow retreat doomed over 250,000 men, condemning them to death or captivity in the frozen ruins. The so-called fortress of Stalingrad became a vast graveyard, a tragic monument to blind obedience and failed leadership. By January 1943, the Stalingrad pocket was a scene of unimaginable horror. Starvation, frostbite, and total collapse haunted every corner. The once proud German Sixth Army, encircled by the Red Army, was now reduced to a desperate struggle for survival in the bitter Russian winter. The snow-covered ruins offered no shelter from the biting cold, and the soldiers' faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. A last-ditch German relief attempt failed to break through the Soviet lines, yet, even as hope faded, Hitler stubbornly forbade any breakout. Inside the shrinking pocket, discipline crumbled. Officers argued, and the chain of command began to unravel as despair set in. Soldiers survived on scraps of bread, sometimes just a crust a day, and whatever they could scavenge from the frozen wasteland. Hunger gnawed at them constantly, and many resorted to eating anything remotely edible. leather, stray animals, even sawdust mixed with soup. Medical supplies were gone. The wounded lay in freezing cellars, shivering and in agony with little hope of treatment. Many died not from their wounds but from the cold and disease that swept through the ranks. The Soviets launched their final relentless assault, squeezing the pocket smaller each day. Artillery thundered day and night, and Red Army soldiers pressed forward, overrunning German positions in the snow-choked ruins. In a final act of desperation, Hitler promoted General Friedrich Paulus to Field Marshal, expecting him to die rather than surrender. But Paulus, surrounded and seeing the hopelessness of the situation, chose life over a pointless death. On January 31, 1943, as Soviet troops stormed his headquarters, Paulus surrendered. The once mighty commander was now a prisoner, his army shattered. The remaining German soldiers, exhausted and broken, surrendered 2 days later. The ordeal was finally over, but for most, captivity would bring new suffering. Of nearly 300,000 men trapped in the Stalingrad pocket, fewer than 100,000 survived to be taken prisoner. The rest had perished from hunger, cold, or combat. Of those who marched into captivity, only about 5,000 would ever return to Germany after the war, their lives forever marked by the ordeal. The Sixth Army was annihilated, its equipment and banners left scattered among the ruins, a symbol of total defeat. The surrender was a devastating blow to German morale and military strength, shattering the myth of Nazi invincibility and sending shockwaves through the German command. Stalingrad had become a grave for an entire army, its frozen fields and shattered buildings a stark reminder of the war's brutality and the cost of hubris. News of Stalingrad's surrender shocked Germany. An entire army lost, the myth of invincibility shattered. The defeat cost Germany 500,000 men and irreplaceable equipment. From this point, Germany lost the initiative on the Eastern Front. The Red Army, emboldened, pushed west relentlessly. For the Soviets, Stalingrad became a symbol of resilience and hope. For the Allies, it proved the Soviets could defeat the Germans, allowing them to plan their own offensives. Stalingrad marked the psychological turning point of World War II. Afterward, Germany was always on the defensive. The defeat exposed Hitler's fatal flaws: ego, poor judgment, and denial of reality. The road to Berlin would be long, but the outcome was now inevitable. The mistakes at Stalingrad sealed the fate of the Third Reich. The world would never be the same. Stalingrad stands as a lesson in the dangers of ego-driven leadership and strategic blindness. Hitler's obsession turned a campaign into catastrophe, dooming the Sixth Army. The battle highlights the importance of logistics, preparation, and listening to sound advice. The Soviet victory was built on planning, sacrifice, and exploiting enemy weaknesses. Stalingrad is a testament to human suffering and endurance, soldiers and civilians caught in a nightmare. The city, now Volgograd, remembers its past with memorials like the Motherland Calls. The legacy warns against hubris and underestimating an opponent. The lessons of Stalingrad remain relevant, a timeless story of how epic blunders lead to epic defeat.